section is really where we think the future of real estate is going. And it's really about human beings. It's less about work product or product to buy. It's more about human beings engaging. And I think you would have seen this as a trend before COVID as well. You would have seen the rise of F&B, restaurant culture booming, retail culture being pushed down. But we believe really that the answer is in people. So if you go to the next slide for me, Mario, sorry. So the big thing here is that as the world changes, we can always redesign our businesses. We can redesign what we offer, how we show up, what we do. We cannot re-engineer the human psyche, right? People will always be people, and they will always need particular things. So if you can go to the next slide. During the pandemic, and what we need is each other, right? So during the pandemic, if you think about what happened to human beings when they weren't around each other, we really got depressed. So 40% of US adults experience mental or behavioral health conditions. 25% of people over the last year have experienced anxiety or depression. 11% considered suicide in the last year. It's been 34% increase in the number of people talking about divorces, right? 31% said lockdown caused irreparable damage to their relationships. So being away from people is bad for us, period. And this is the answer, I think, to all of this. It isn't let's create a better store. It's let's reimagine places around how they can solve this human problem for us. Can you go to the next slide, Mario? So here's the kind of the real answer here is that the human condition dictates that we need each other. Karl Marx said, and I love this quote, it's not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. We're social creatures and we need each other. So imagine reinventing everything that we're doing around finding ways to get people to spend meaningful time together. If you can go to the next slide, please. Social interaction is healing for us, right? It's imperative for our vitality and our health and our physical well-being. A couple of little points here just around this. Regular contact with friends, family, and neighbors gives you a meaningful survival advantage. It's equal to quitting smoking in terms of its health advantage. It gives you twice the magnitude of health advantage of regular exercise or maintaining your healthy weight. Positive impact on your immune function, etc. It increases your life expectancy. So being together as humans is actually a necessity, a physiological and psychological necessity. And I think this is where we begin to start thinking there's opportunity here for the future of place. As shopping goes away, as the future of workplace goes away, there is something very important that we need here. Can you go to the next slide, please? So, last big point here. Instead of focusing on the function of place, a place to shop, a place to work, a place to eat, businesses now need to start functioning around how can we get people together and elevate the collective life experience. That's the future of it all. Next slide, please. So if you go back to retail, office, and hospitality, and we were to kind of pontificate for a minute, what's the future of each of these things based on what I just said, right? Which is human experience and bringing people together. We don't need to come here for function. We need to come here for socialization and life experience, collective life experience. So brands, I believe, are going to become instrumental in this process of we create places where people come together to learn and grow around shared interests and values. Less around they come here to buy stuff. Transaction will no longer be the driver of traffic to stores or places that brands have. Consumers are going to start to pay you to spend time in places, to have exciting experiences. And profitability for these brands in the world of retail will be measured beyond the bricks and mortar experience and the sales and the dollar value. They will be measured in terms of brand value and marketing value. So I don't know if you guys know this place. It's called the Color Factory. It's an experiential place in New York City. I think they've opened up some other ones. It's $38 a ticket, lines around the corner to get into this place. Pre-COVID, by the way. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry to be bossing you around, Mario, having you flip slides for me. So the future work. So we believe that as AI becomes more advanced, the ability for humans to think creatively and work collaboratively in and out of the office is never going to be more prized than it's going to be in the kind of the coming future. The ability to be together is going to make a really big difference. We no longer will need to come to the office to sit in a cube and do our work, to input information into an Excel document. However, we'll look for hybrid environments where we can focus on coming together and working with each other. And then we'll do all the other stuff at home. So the HQ, the big office, will only be a place to come when you need to work together. And we're already starting to design and strategize environments like this for some of the biggest companies in the world. They're already starting to say, we don't need all these offices anymore. We're going to cut our office space, like Salesforce said, by 50, 60%. We just need places to come together. Working from home is going to become a mandate. No longer will you have to ask for the ability to work from home. Your companies are going to tell you, you must work from home at least 3 days a week, period. Part of it. And flexibility and autonomy will become the norm. And it's going to reduce the need for having a desk for everyone. We're going to come into an office and we're going to be grabbing whatever space is available or booking it in advance. No longer are you going to have a desk at your office for everyone. The next slide, please. And the last bit here is hospitality. And we believe that the kind of the future of this thing is something we're calling slow travel. So we work, we socialize, we sleep anywhere, right? We're living in flow. We're going to learn to live on the road, just like I'm doing right now. Not for escape or business, but simply because we want to. We're going to become these hyper-mobile beings that are moving around because we're not as locked to the office or the need to be there. I can work from anywhere. So hotels are going to probably need to reposition as something that's more like a home. Long-term stays, something like Annie mentioned a minute ago, where they're more authentic, they're flexible, there's more for you. Rural destinations are going to grow and be more sought after in the world of hospitality. Less about going to big cities and more about escaping to rural places. And travel is going to be more about intimacy and connection. We're going to do it together. We're going to do less travel alone, less business travel. And the next slide, please. So that's that section right there. I know we lost some time because of my technical hiccups there, sorry. But if there are any quick questions before we go on to the next section, happy to field them.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a question, Bart. You just talked about that, let's say the pure act of purchasing goods is not going to be the driver for getting people to these spaces. And so where does the money come from in these scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the big challenge. And there's something that we've been working on. We call it profitability 2.0. So if you're a mall developer, you've put a lot of other people's money into developing and creating something that people are going to pay for space within so that people will come and buy products from them. And they base their profitability on the number of people that come and buy goods. And the goods sold have to greatly outweigh the cost of being in that shopping mall. That, we do not believe, will be a winning kind of equation in the future. It's already failing. And what we have to begin to do is to recognize that brands can derive other types of value from having people with them in place. So some of the money is essentially marketing. If you think about Samsung's 837, which is in one of the most premier retail locations in New York City, in the meatpacking district, they don't sell a single product there. It costs them millions of dollars a year to operate this incredible experiential place that people come. It's like a theme park to try out Samsung experiences and products. But there's marketing dollars there. And every time somebody's there and they take a picture and they post it on Instagram, that's worth $1 too, right? So they're beginning to recognize that this place is providing them brand value and marketing value. And they can attach a dollar value to all of those impressions. And those people ultimately are going to begin to see Samsung as a brand that they like better than Apple, or at least start to give Samsung a chance. And that experience has more resonant value with those people than an ad in a magazine would, because we're just glossing over all of those. So that's where I think a lot of the money is going to come from. A lot of the money as well is going to come from purchase that happens in other places. So I can get you to come to this place and look at something, but you don't need to buy it there. As long as you buy it somewhere else, I've still got marketing value from that experience. So there's purchase out of place experience. And then finally, something else I mentioned before, which is pay to play. I'll give you $50 to come in here and hang out in the Cartier experience. It's happening.
Hey, Bart, I've got a follow-up to that. Speaking of brands and the creation of brands and how values are potentially part and parcel of how you begin to think about it. I recall hearing something about, quote, a picture being taken inside a Whole Foods at one point. And I was wondering, since it's my understanding you were involved with Whole Foods,
Yeah.
how it was that you developed the strategy for the market that's kind of redefined marketplaces. In a sense, right? It is sort of an experience. You know, it's kind of, if one comes to your neighborhood has arrived in some way, right? And what that photograph meant to that one person that you were, that told you not to take one.
Well, yeah, it's a funny story because that was John Mackey. John Mackey was the founder of Whole Foods, and in a previous life, I worked at a company called Pompey AD, and we did a significant amount of work for Whole Foods. And we were trying to tell John Mackey about the future. And we were showing him pictures of his stores. And he said, "How'd you get this picture in my store? You're not allowed to take pictures." And I said, "Well, I went online. I grabbed it online. A bunch of people are taking pictures of your store." And he was like beside himself, like, "That's against our rules. You're not allowed to take pictures in our stores." And I went to this thing called Flickr, which was a big photo sharing thing back, 15 years ago. And there were 30,000 pictures inside of Whole Foods. He almost fell out of his chair. He couldn't believe it. It's like, "You're not allowed to do that." We said to him, "Look, man, you can either be facilitating the conversation or out of the conversation. And we believe that as a brand, you should allow people to converse about you. You should want them to talk about you, good or bad. Be part of the chat, of the conversation, and let people talk. Let people take pictures. The more you block them from engaging about you, or you try to push down their realistic conversation, the less they're going to trust you." And that'll lead into a point I'm going to talk about here in a second in the next section. But there's a lot of angst against corporations that limit conversation. And we believe that opening up conversation and creating places that people want to go and talk about and share stories with each other about is promoting the brand. So it's good. It's really good to have people want to come and tell stories about their personal experiences in your meaningful brand experience or your store.
Hey, Bart, this is Elaine. I have a question for you about how all of what you've just said affects the residential market. So if you're talking about this flow trend and people are receding to the rural environments, Costa Rica, for instance, Barbados. How does that affect, how does that affect, you're talking, I know, solely about brick and mortar, but I work for a city and we look at it holistically, not just about our office market, but our residential market. Because part of why people choose to live in certain locations is proximity to businesses. And if we've got major tech companies, high income companies that are coming in, that may affect negatively it could potentially negatively affect property values, which is important for our local jurisdictions. And that has a trend across the line for every jurisdiction, right? So just curious, so that's my first question, because you're brilliant, so you can answer that. The second question is, you had talked about Salesforce letting go 50% of their inventory for allowing this, keeping space just for the come together time. But from a social psychological perspective, what I'm reading in these articles, and Anderson, UCLA just put together one about kind of this roaring 20s phenomenon, which is people are so pent up that what we may see sort of in a midterm pandemic is just this, everybody's going everywhere all the time. So are you thinking, is your insight that we're going to have sort of like this very quick spike of travel and activity and then it'll calm down? Or do you just think, that's kind of what I'm curious about, because I work for a city, we like TOT tax, so I'm trying to kind of tap into that brain trust of yours and try and figure out kind of what you're thinking, because we are hearing different things. We know the office market's not going to be the same, but we know people want to keep it. We know there's pent up experiences. And also I was curious from a mall perspective, does the mall perspective change with demographics? Because the mall that we have actually sources out a lot of demographics, and it's still quite busy. I mean, when I drive by, there are more cars in that parking lot than I would expect during a COVID-19 pandemic. So I was just curious if you're seeing that the people who are going for these in-person retail experiences, are these people, higher or lower on the income bracket, and where are they falling because of these cultural dynamics? So
cool.
5 questions in one. Go to it, babe.
Yeah, that's 3 big questions. The first one, residential. I think you're going to have a major shift in the residential market. I mean, you're already seeing an exodus from New York. I think I read somewhere that like 150, 200,000 people moved out of New York in the first couple of months of COVID and will not be returning. I live in the Catskills up north. Property values are through the roof. So I believe that there's going to be a migration to a different type of place, primarily because I do not need to be near where I work anymore. I can work from afar. I can raise my kids in a nicer environment, a nicer place, a nicer experience, and still dial in and do all of this stuff from afar, and maybe get on the train once a week and go back into the city. So I think you're going to see a shift demographically and geographically in where people live in America. I also think you're going to have a lot of communities that are in a lot of trouble. We're doing a project for a big mall in the Mid-Atlantic, and in and around that area, a number of large pharmaceutical companies, which are all going through this process of reinventing who needs to be there and why. And the mall is already starting to recognize that people are going to be leaving the community. The residential market's going to change, and the commercial footfall is going to change, because there aren't going to be these big employment anchors like there were before. I'll jump to, what was the second question again? Sorry, it's hard for me to keep all these together. The second was about
demographics and what we're seeing in the first was the mall, the second was demographics that we're seeing in the mall, and the third is, inventory for keeping these social psychological experiences intact.
Great. So demographics in the mall. So here's what we're seeing in the work that we're doing, is that by and large, in general, the more wealthy you are and the more educated you are, the more likely you are to have adopted a buy online mentality and be less enthralled by spending time in malls. We're seeing lower income communities and down market retail environments still see higher footfall than upper end malls. So that there's kind of an interesting thing there. That doesn't mean I think that luxury is going to go away and high-end malls like Bal Harbour, et cetera, are going to go away. I think people are still going to want to come shop in those places. It's just the frequency is going to go down. And I think if you're a wealthier consumer, you're more likely to want to go to those places to go have dinner and then maybe go see some things. But if you go to some of the new projects that we've seen developed, like Hudson Yards, I spent a lot of time in that thing pre-COVID. A lot of people in there. I didn't see a lot of shopping bags. That's a good way to tell whether people are buying stuff or not. So there might be cars in the parking lot, but are people in there actually buying goods? Or are they in there trying stuff on and playing around and eating and maybe not actually coming out with as many shopping bags as they might have before? So I'd be pretty concerned about that.
I